In the heart of ancient Greece, there stands a battlefield whose soil still remembers the tremble of marching feet, the thunder of iron meeting iron, and the shouts of men who fought believing the fate of their world hung in the balance. Chaeronea is no vast, imposing plain. It is no grand amphitheater carved by nature for war. It is an unassuming valley between rolling hills, quiet, pastoral, almost humble. Yet it was here, more than 2,000 years ago, that a young prince stepped onto the world stage and changed the course of history forever. Before he conquered Persia, before he marched across deserts and mountains, before his name became a myth spoken across continents, Alexander was simply the 16-year-old son of Philip II of Macedon. A boy surrounded by men who doubted him, allies who questioned him, enemies who mocked him. Yet on this ground, under a sky darkened by dust and dread, Alexander proved that kings are not merely crowned, they are forged. This is not just the story of a battle. This is the story of a moment, one decisive hour when childhood ended, legend began, and the ancient Greek world took its final step toward a new age. The Battle of Chaeronea was the birth of empire, the twilight of city-states, and the first unmistakable sign that the world would one day kneel to a man whose ambition had no equal. But to understand why Chaeronea mattered, we must return to a Greece that was glorious yet fractured, a brilliant civilization dimming under the weight of its own rivalries. Ancient Greece was not a country, but a tapestry of cities. Proud Athens with its philosophers and fleets, defiant Thebes with its legendary warriors, Sparta brooding with its austere discipline. Each city was powerful in its own right, yet none could rule the rest. Their alliances were brittle, their peace fragile, their ambitions eternal. For decades, these city-states had fought one another with a ferocity unmatched by any external foe. The Peloponnesian War had ravaged the land. Cities were burned, populations starved, armies destroyed. The war ended with Sparta's victory, but not with stability. Athens plotted comebacks. Thebes rose to supremacy, and Sparta declined. Power passed from city to city like a torch falling from weary hands. Amid this chaos, a new force stirred to the north, Macedon. To many Greeks, Macedon was a land of rugged hills, coarse manners, and barbarian kings. They ignored the truth. Macedon was transforming. Under the ambitious gaze of King Philip II of Macedon, Macedon became a nation of hardened soldiers and innovative tactics, a realm ready to expand. Philip was no mere monarch. He was a strategist of startling brilliance, a visionary who saw what Greece refused to see. The age of independent city-states was ending, and only unity could survive what came next. But the cities did not want unity. They wanted independence, pride, and the comfort of old hatreds. So when Philip marched south, many Greeks did not fear him. They dismissed him. That mistake permitted the rise of the most dangerous army Greece had ever faced. Philip II is often overshadowed by his son, yet without him, Alexander would never have become Alexander. While Greece squabbled, Philip rebuilt his kingdom piece by piece. He reinvented the phalanx, arming his men with the fearsome sarissa, a spear so long it formed a moving wall of forested death. He drilled his soldiers relentlessly, turning farmers into professionals, turning nobles into cavalry that could strike like thunderbolts. As Philip forged his army, he forged his son alongside it. Alexander's childhood was not one of gentle upbringing. He grew up amid campaigns, councils, and constant instruction. His teachers included generals hardened by war, poets who sang of heroes, and philosophers who taught that greatness was not a gift, it was a duty. Aristotle himself shaped Alexander's mind, filling it with visions of knowledge, empire, and the moral responsibilities of kingship. But Philip gave him something else, something far more dangerous than education. He allowed Alexander to watch, to listen, to learn the art of war not from stories, but from reality. The boy observed his father negotiate alliances, break them when needed, win battles with wit rather than brute force. He studied every tactic, every feint, every calculated risk. And amid all this education, he developed one unshakable truth. A king must not merely rule, he must lead. By 16, Alexander was already given command of troops. By 17, he had fought his first skirmishes. By 18, he would be introduced to the battlefield that would engrave his name onto the pillars of history. But before he faced the enemy, Philip faced the greatest coalition Greece had assembled in generations. Athens and Thebes united out of fear of Macedon's rising power. Their alliance was powerful. Their armies were experienced. Their determination was absolute. The stage was set. The Athenians, fearing Macedon would end their independence, rallied their citizens to arms. Old men who had fought in the Peloponnesian War returned to service. Young men who had never seen combat marched beside them. Their pride burned brighter than their discipline. Thebes, meanwhile, sent its elite, the Sacred Band. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were a brotherhood of lovers and companions who believed courage was sharpened when shared between souls bound by devotion. They had broken Spartan supremacy years earlier. Now they stood ready to defend Greece once more. Together, Athens and Thebes formed an army tens of thousands strong, an army that believed itself fighting for the soul of Greek freedom. Philip knew what he faced. He also knew something the Greeks could not imagine. He would not fight alone. At his side was his son, Alexander, 18 years old, commanding the left wing of the Macedonian army. This was no ceremonial position. This was the crucible. The armies marched toward the small town of Chaeronea, a place scarcely worthy of mention in histories until now. Hills rose around the valley like silent witnesses, narrowing the field into a stage perfect for phalanxes and cavalry. Both armies knew this land would decide the war. On the eve of the confrontation, Alexander spent his night not in sleep but walking the perimeter of his camp, studying the terrain, imagining the battle, listening to the murmurs of soldiers who wondered whether his young commander could hold the line. History shows that he heard their doubts and sharpened his resolve. At dawn, both armies emerged onto the field. The sun rose on a Greece that did not yet understand it was looking into its future. The morning air was thick with dust and anticipation as the armies aligned. On the Macedonian right stood Philip, seasoned, confident, patient. On the left stood Alexander, youthful, determined, facing the Sacred Band, the finest infantry Greece had ever produced. A silence fell across the valley, and then with a single blast of a trumpet, the world changed. The Macedonian phalanx advanced, its sarissas lowering like the quills of some monstrous iron creature. The Greeks met them with shields and spears of their own, slamming into the Macedonian line with the fury of those who believe they are fighting for survival. The ground shook, men screamed, bronze shattered, blood darkened the soil. What makes Chaeronea extraordinary is not merely that Macedon won. It is how Philip executed a plan so subtle, so daring, that his enemies realized too late they had been playing into his hands from the very first step. Philip, with the calm of a man who had fought more battles than he could count, ordered a slow, calculated retreat on his wing. His men stepped back, step by step, in perfect discipline. The Athenians, believing the Macedonians were breaking, surged forward. They had taken the bait. The more fiercely they pushed, the more Philip withdrew.
drawing them away from the center, stretching their formation, weakening their cohesion. The Athenians were no longer fighting as a united bloc. They were now a desperate swarm chasing an illusion of victory. And while Athens pushed too far, too fast, Alexander saw his moment. This is the moment the world remembers, the moment the prince became the conqueror. While the Athenian right wing plunged after Philip, the Greek left held firm. Thebes, anchored by the Sacred Band, refused to advance prematurely. They held their position with iron discipline. But they now faced Alexander. With a cry that rose above the din of battle, the young prince lowered his spear, ignited the charge of the companion cavalry, and tore into the Theban line with a ferocity no one expected from a commander barely past boyhood. His cavalry struck like lightning against the rock of Thebes, clashing with spear points that once humbled Sparta itself. But Alexander did not falter. With every pass, every thrust, every maneuver, he drove deeper, looking not just to break the enemy, but to shatter the heart of their strength. When the moment came, Alexander wheeled his cavalry and plunged straight toward the Sacred Band. This was more than tactical. This was symbolic. The Greeks believed the Sacred Band unbeatable, a unit chosen by the gods themselves. But Alexander believed something else, that even the greatest legends fall when destiny demands it. The Macedonians struck with overwhelming force. Surrounded, outnumbered, the Sacred Band refused to retreat. They fought to the last man, dying where they stood in a final act of devotion and defiance. When the dust settled, their bodies lay in formation, a wall of the fallen, still holding the line in death. Alexander had broken them, and with that, the battle was won.
With the Athenian line scattered and the Theban elite annihilated, the Greek resistance collapsed. Philip halted his men, allowing the surviving Athenians to flee. He respected their history, their intellect, their culture. He would not destroy them. But Thebes suffered deeply. The loss of the Sacred Band was not just military, it was spiritual. Greece was beaten. In the aftermath, Philip convened the League of Corinth, uniting Greece under Macedonian leadership. This was not a tyranny. It was a new order, the first chapter in a unified Greek world. The member states agreed to peace among themselves and to join Philip in the great crusade he had long envisioned, the invasion of Persia. But fate intervened. Before he could lead this mission, Philip was assassinated. And so, at 20 years old, Alexander inherited not just a kingdom, but a destiny born at Chaeronea. The battle had shown his courage, his instinct, his capacity to command. It won the loyalty of the army, the respect of allies, and the fear of enemies. It was this victory, not his birth, not his education, that made possible everything that came after: the fall of Persia, the conquest of Egypt, the march to India, and the forging of an empire stretching from Greece to the edges of the known world. Chaeronea was the spark that lit the fire of Alexander's legend, a fire that would burn until his death, and long, long beyond it. Today, the battlefield of Chaeronea lies quiet again. Grass grows where blood once pooled. Birds sing where warriors once cried out. Travelers pass through unaware that they are walking across the ground where a teenager stepped from the shadow of his father into the blaze of immortality. The world often remembers Alexander for his greatest conquests, for Gaugamela, for Issus, for the cities he built and the kingdoms he toppled. But every monument has a foundation, and every legend has a beginning. Chaeronea is that beginning. Here, in this humble valley, Alexander proved he was not just a prince. He proved he was inevitable, and history from that day forward belonged to him.